Welcome to the deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
Today we're looking at a deeply unsettling anomaly in the global information space.
Yeah, unsettling is definitely the right word for it.
Because if you're like me, you track geopolitics, right? And we live in this era where modern warfare is just it's live streamed.
Right, constantly.
It's geolocated, endlessly analyzed by millions of people in real time.
Literally as it happens.
Yeah, exactly. But over the last 24 hours, the digital footprint of the Iran conflict it's almost entirely vanished.
Completely dropped off the map.
Right. And suddenly that whole fire hose of data has just been shut off.
It's completely unprecedented in recent history.
So we are diving into a newly released piece of analysis today. It's titled Shifting Tempos of the Iran Conflict.
Good piece. Very revealing.
Yeah, and it lays out this fascinating, almost paradoxical situation.
Yeah.
Because on one hand, we have this sudden, inexplicable hard stop in frontline footage. But on the other hand, we have global commodity markets, the exact markets that should be absolutely panicking right now,
Right. They should be through the roof.
behaving in entirely unexpected, almost counterintuitive ways, at least initially.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is that in an age of total information overload, silence actually speaks louder than the noise.
I love that. Silence speaking louder than noise.
Because it's the geopolitical equivalent of a black hole,
Yeah.
really. And it's entirely fascinating.
So our mission today, for you listening, is to figure out the correlation between those two mysteries. What happens to the machinery of global markets when the information age just goes dark?
Right.
And what does this specific silence tell us about the ultimate end game of the conflict?
We are so accustomed to the exhaust fumes of modern warfare.
Exhaust fumes?
Yeah, the endless stream of TikToks showing troop movements.
Yeah.
The Telegram channels uploading drone footage. The open source intelligence analysts just mapping every single inch of the
The
battlefield.
BOSINT guys.
Exactly. We've built entirely new analytical frameworks based on the assumption that this visibility is just guaranteed.
Right, we just assume someone is recording it.
Always. So when a highly consequential region abruptly stops producing that data, we have to fundamentally reevaluate our position.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's get right into the mechanics of that digital silence.
Let's do it.
Because the excerpt highlights a very specific, measurable drop.
It does.
It points directly to aggregator platforms. Specifically, it mentions viralvisible.com.
Right, a major hub for this stuff.
Yeah, and it notes that the volume of war footage uploaded in the last 24 hours has just completely cratered.
Down to almost nothing.
But it's not just the aggregators, right? The source notes that the usual nodes on Twitter have also flatlined.
Yeah, and that's the crucial part.
And it makes a real point to mention that both official accounts and individual on-the-ground posters have stopped uploading original content.
Right, and in intelligence analysis, as well as in algorithmic financial trading, the absence of data is not neutral.
It's not just a glitch.
No, it is in itself the loudest, most critical signal on the board. We are essentially being forced to read the negative space.
To decode what the silence is actively hiding.
Exactly. Lumping official military accounts and individual citizen posters together in this context is, well, it's the first major analytical key the source provides.
So let's separate them out to understand the gravity of the shift.
Good idea. Let's start with the official accounts.
All right.
Modern militaries run highly sophisticated, incredibly active information operations.
Oh, they post constantly.
Constantly. To project strength, to control the domestic narrative, shape international perception.
Right.
So if state-level military accounts and official spokespeople suddenly go silent.
It's not because the social media manager took a sick day.
No, absolutely not.
What?
It almost universally indicates an MCON scenario
Emissions control.
or a massive operational pause.
So they're turning off the radios, turning off the phone.
Exactly. In military doctrine, there are specific windows where the strategic need for absolute operational security just completely overrides the propaganda war.
Wow. Okay, so if you are masking major logistical repositioning.
Moving heavy armor under the cover of a communications blackout, for example.
Right, or preparing for a new phase of operation.
The very first thing you do is sever the digital umbilical cord.
Because you don't want a stray tweet giving away a divisional headquarters.
Precisely. One geolocated selfie and your command post gets hit by a cruise missile.
Man. But wait, let me push back on that a bit.
Sure.
I totally get the operational security angle for the official accounts.
Right.
Generals can issue gag orders, they can confiscate phones.
They do it all the time.
But what about the individual posters? The text explicitly says they went dark at the exact same time.
Right, synchronized.
So, I mean, couldn't this just be a massive state-level suppression of the local internet?
Like a kill switch.
Yeah, exactly. We've seen authoritarian regimes and combatant nations just flip the kill switch on mobile networks during regional unrest.
We definitely have.
Isn't it a massive leap to assume this widespread, synchronized silence is a subtle tactical shift rather than just a brute force infrastructural blackout?
It's a very necessary question to ask. And you're right, the kill switch is absolutely a standard play in the modern geopolitical playbook.
Right.
But we have to look at the specific nuances of network architecture to see why that doesn't fully explain this anomaly.
Okay, school me on the network architecture.
When a state executes a total BGP route withdrawal,
GP.
Border Gateway Protocol, it's essentially unplugging the national fiber optic backbone from the global internet.
Okay, got it.
When they do that, it leaves a highly distinct, universally measurable signature. Network monitors globally see the entire country drop offline instantly.
So it's not a secret when that happens?
No, it's blazing red on every cybersecurity dashboard on Earth.
Huh.
Furthermore, a total kill switch eliminates all traffic.
All of
Yeah. But the source specifically identifies a stark decrease in war footage and frontline videos.
Ah, I see where you're going.
Right. If it were a blanket national blackout, we wouldn't just be missing combat footage.
All civilian digital life would vanish simultaneously.
Exactly. Grandma's recipes, local sports updates, everything. The fact that this silence is localized to the specific demographics and accounts that typically share frontline content?
Suggests something much more complex than a severed fiber optic cable.
Precisely.
Okay, so if the local cell towers aren't just universally switched off,
Which they don't appear to be.
what forces the individuals on the ground to stop posting? I mean, they're not under military orders.
That brings us to the physical realities of the battlefield.
Okay.
If individual soldiers, embedded observers, and local civilians are simultaneously unable or unwilling to post,
Yeah.
it strongly suggests a physical shift in the locus of the conflict itself.
A shift in the locus, meaning the war moved.
Right. Warfare, especially in its initial highly volatile stages, often takes place in or around populated urban centers.
Or where 4G and 5G networks are ubiquitous.
Exactly. There's Wi-Fi everywhere. But if the fighting moves, perhaps shifting out into much more remote, disconnected, or rugged terrain,
Then the sheer ability to capture and upload high-definition video is fundamentally compromised by the geography.
you just don't have DARs out in the desert or the mountains.
That makes total sense.
Alternatively, we have to consider the deployment of advanced electronic warfare.
EW.
Yes. Modern militaries utilize localized jamming platforms that can completely suppress cellular and radio frequencies within a specific tactical radius.
Without taking down the wider regional grid.
Exactly. So the individual posters aren't silent because they chose to be.
They are silent because the physical environment they are operating in has been digitally sterilized.
Digitally sterilized. That's a great way to put it.
That is just a fascinating way to frame it. I mean, as observers, we are so heavily trained to analyze the videos we do see.
Right, we look at the background.
We analyze the terrain, the equipment, the weather in the background to figure out where they are.
Everyone's an armchair detective.
Exactly. But this source is forcing us to realize that the complete absence of those uploads is the primary data point.
It is the main event.
It's a massive flashing warning light telling us that the underlying architecture of the conflict has fundamentally mutated.
And that leads us directly into the core thesis of the text.
Right, the shifting tempo. The author posits a direct question based on this silence.
I have it right here.
Go ahead.
Could this war settle into the same kind of prolonged, lower intensity tempo we've seen in Ukraine?
Yes, the Ukraine comparison.
And that single sentence is the analytical pivot point for everything else we were going to discuss today.
Especially the market reactions, which we'll get to in a second.
Right. But before we get to the economics, we have to precisely define what a prolonged lower intensity tempo actually means in modern military doctrine.
Let's do it. And I want to make a quick impartiality check here for you listening.
It's very important.
The text brings up Ukraine as a tactical comparison. We have to maintain strict neutrality here.
Absolutely.
We are analyzing the tempo and the tactics objectively, without taking any political sides regarding the conflict itself or the comparison to Ukraine.
Our focus is purely on the strategic and informational shifts described in the text.
Exactly, just sticking to the source. So break down that phrase for us. Lower intensity.
The comparison to Ukraine is incredibly instructive, provided we analyze it strictly through that lens of tactical evolution.
Right.
Lower intensity is a notoriously deceptive term.
Because it sounds peaceful.
Right. To a civilian ear, it sounds like the conflict is de-escalating, that it's becoming less violent or less dangerous.
Which is not the case.
In a military context, it means absolutely nothing of the sort.
Right. It doesn't mean the war is over. It means a shift in the type of violence.
Precisely. It refers to the transition from maneuver warfare to positional or attritional warfare.
Maneuver to positional. Explain maneuver warfare first.
When a conflict kicks off, you typically see rapid maneuver warfare, sweeping armored thrusts,
Deep aerial penetration.
fast-moving infantry advances attempting to secure massive swaths of territory quickly.
Tanks rolling down highways.
Exactly. And that rapid dynamic movement is exactly what produces a flood of highly dramatic, highly shareable video content.
Because it's visually spectacular.
It's cinematic. But if neither side achieves a decisive early knockout blow,
Which happens a lot.
the lines begin to stabilize. Armies dig in. They build deep, multi-layered defensive networks.
Trenches, minefields.
Dragon's Teeth pre-sighted artillery kill zones.
Wow.
That is the shift to a prolonged, lower-intensity tempo.
Sweeping movements stop.
And the conflict devolves into a brutal, grinding, static artillery duel.
It's the difference between a high-speed car chase and a slow, exhausting, multi-year siege.
That's a perfect analogy.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. If we synthesize that tactical reality with the digital blackout from the first part of the excerpt, the picture becomes incredibly clear.
How so?
Well, the viral internet, algorithmically speaking, requires maneuver warfare.
Yes.
It requires novelty, movement, and visible, dramatic changes in the environment to keep people scrolling and sharing.
Because algorithms crave engagement.
Exactly. Positional warfare, like digging a trench, waiting out an artillery barrage, or guarding a static checkpoint for weeks on end. It's horrifying.
Truly grim.
But it is fundamentally static. It doesn't generate the kind of shocking, high-adrenaline novel footage that spikes the algorithms on platforms like Twitter or viralvisible.com.
It's repetitive.
Right. So the silence isn't a glitch. It's a symptom.
The digital ecosystem is literally starving because the physical tempo of the war has slowed to a crawl.
That is the exact correlation.
We're witnessing the digital reflection of a grinding, attritional war.
And there is a profound psychological element to this as well, isn't there? Both for the participants and the observers.
Absolutely. When a conflict settles into this prolonged tempo, the sheer exhaustion on the ground means the motivation to document and upload every single moment just evaporates.
You're just trying to survive.
The novelty wears off, replaced by the grim routine of survival. And simultaneously, the global audience.
Us sitting at home on our phones.
Right. We are so accustomed to the dopamine hits of rapid developments. We begin to tune out the static, repetitive nature of positional warfare.
We get bored, essentially.
Sadly, yes. The digital silence is a localized tactical reality, but it is also a broader symptom of audience fatigue and algorithmic deprioritization.
Which brings us to the most perplexing part of this entire analysis, the economic anomaly.
Yes, the market reaction, or lack thereof.
Because think about it, if the physical reality on the ground is shifting into this massive, grinding, multi-year positional phase,
Right.
you would absolutely expect the physical commodities coming out of that region and the global markets that rely on them to reflect that grim reality immediately.
You'd expect panic.
Total panic. Yet the source notes a massive anomaly. The global commodities markets, specifically precious metals, oil, and gas, did not immediately react the way historical precedent dictates.
They didn't spike right away.
No. The text notes that rather than spiking, these assets were actually under pressure for a while before crude oil suddenly jumped overnight.
Under pressure.
Yeah, and if you've ever tracked Brent crude or gold futures, you know that a conflict in a globally significant region like Iran usually translates to an instantaneous, violently upward spike in prices.
Immediately. Panic buying sets in.
Risk premiums explode. Algorithms bid up the price in milliseconds. So what does this all mean? Why did the market initially suppress the price?
It's arguably the most complex and revealing piece of the entire puzzle.
Let's figure it out.
To understand why a major geopolitical event was met with a collective shrug by the markets.
Right, why they remained under pressure.
Meaning there was more selling pressure than buying pressure.
Okay.
We have to look at the architecture of modern algorithmic trading and the psychology of institutional risk assessment.
Oh, this is fascinating. Let's look at the algorithms first.
As we just discussed, quantitative funds increasingly rely on natural language processing.
NLP.
Right. They're essentially bots reading Twitter, Telegram, and news aggregators to gauge geopolitical risk.
So the bots are reading the tweets?
They trade on sentiment.
Oh, man. So when the digital front lines went utterly silent,
You see where this is going.
the trading algorithms essentially saw a massive drop in conflict-related keywords and interpreted that silence as a de-escalation.
That is highly likely. It's a fascinating, almost fatal flaw in sentiment-based trading.
That is wild,
The machine reads the absence of war footage as the absence of war.
because it can't see the trenches.
Right. It completely fails to understand the tactical imam or the shift to a lower intensity tempo that we just analyzed.
It just sees 0 tweets and says, sell the oil.
The algorithms were starved of the very data they use to justify a price spike, so they maintained a neutral or even bearish posture.
Keeping the assets under pressure.
Exactly. But we can't just blame the bots.
The humans messed up too.
Oh, the human element, the massive institutional trading desks. They also played a massive role through 2 major cognitive biases,
Okay, lay them on me.
the priced-in fallacy and the assumption of containment.
Let's break those down. What does it actually mean in this context when a trader says the conflict was priced in?
It means that the market is always trying to predict the future, not react to the present.
Forward-looking.
Always. In the weeks or months leading up to this conflict, intelligence leaks, diplomatic breakdowns, and troop buildups were likely visible to macro analysts.
They saw the satellite photos of the tanks massing on the border.
Right. The market had already calculated a baseline probability of an armed conflict and had incrementally adjusted oil and gold prices upward to account for that specific risk long before the first shot was fired.
So by the time the shooting starts, they're not surprised.
It's highly reminiscent of the phony war period in 1939, or the initial market sluggishness just before the massive 1973 oil shock.
The calm before the storm.
By the time the event actually occurs, the floor traders and the macro funds look at it and say, we already bought the rumor. The actual event isn't worse than our worst-case model.
So they don't buy more.
In fact, some might sell the news to take profits,
Actively driving the price down.
putting it under pressure.
Wow. And the second bias, the assumption of containment.
Yeah.
They essentially bet that the war would stay within a neatly defined geographical box.
Exactly. Modern markets are incredibly cynical, but they are also highly focused on structural global impact.
They don't care about the local tragedy, they care about the supply chain.
Precisely. The initial assessment by the major desks was likely that, despite the violence, the broader macroeconomic infrastructure would remain untouched.
So they looked at the initial strikes, assumed the conflict would be localized to specific border zones.
And calculated that the major global shipping lanes, the critical pipelines, and the broader production facilities would be insulated.
So if the consensus on Wall Street or in the City of London is that the physical oil will continue to flow onto tankers uninterrupted despite a localized conflict.
The geopolitical risk premium collapses. They were betting aggressively against structural contagion.
But they were wrong.
Very wrong.
Or at least their timeline was completely off. Because the text doesn't let the market off the hook.
No, it doesn't.
It states that after being under pressure for a while, crude oil jumped overnight.
Jumped overnight.
It's that sudden, violent, delayed reversal that we need to understand.
It's the crux of the economic argument.
Like, how do you go from a suppressed, mathematically confident market-assuming containment to a sudden overnight spike while half the trading world is asleep?
That overnight jump is the realization phase.
The hangover.
Exactly. It is the moment the market finally digests the reality of the shifting tempo we discussed in Section 2.
Okay, walk me through that.
You have to trace the timeline of a trading day. While the U.S. markets might be closed, Asian and European energy markets are opening.
Right. The market never truly sleeps.
The delayed reaction is the time it takes for institutional capital to realize They have completely misread the nature of the conflict.
Because for a while, they were holding their breath, assuming a quick, contained skirmish.
Like waiting for a storm to hit. The barometer drops, but the rain holds off for so long that people put away their umbrellas.
Only for a flash flood to happen overnight. I love that analogy. It perfectly captures what the text is describing.
As hours turn into a full day, and the digital front lines remain eerily quiet, the deeper analysis starts to circulate among the trading desks.
They realize the silence isn't a de-escalation.
Right. They realize the lack of movement means the front lines are freezing.
The realization hits.
It means the conflict is transitioning into a prolonged, Ukraine-style attritional grind.
And from an economic standpoint, a prolonged, static conflict carries a fundamentally different and infinitely more dangerous set of long-term risks than a brief, violent clash.
Infinitely more dangerous. A quick war might disrupt a few shipments.
But a multi-year attritional war.
Fundamentally destabilizes the entire region's long-term production capacity.
It drains national budgets.
It increases the likelihood of infrastructure sabotage as desperation sets in.
And it guarantees years of elevated risk to shipping lanes.
Decades, sometimes. The overnight jump suggests that a critical mass of institutional money suddenly did the math on a 5-year attritional war in the Middle East.
The containment assumption shattered.
The risk premium was violently repriced,
And the algorithmic models that had been shorting the silence suddenly had to cover their positions.
causing a massive cascading spike in crude.
It's incredible how all these seemingly disparate threads, a lack of Twitter videos, a shift in military doctrine, and a delayed reaction in oil futures are so tightly interwoven.
They're all reacting to the exact same unseen reality.
Which brings us to the final and undoubtedly the most consequential piece of the excerpt.
The endgame.
Right. The author poses a definitive question regarding the ultimate resolution of all these anomalies.
Will the Iran war end in a complete surrender, or are we heading towards some kind of negotiated peace deal?
It presents a very stark binary, complete surrender versus a negotiated peace.
It does. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, evaluating that binary requires us to apply everything we've just uncovered.
Okay, let's apply it.
If we accept the premise that the conflict is entering a prolonged, lower intensity tempo,
Which the silence and the oil markets both point to.
right, then we have to look at how attritional warfare historically concludes.
Let's analyze the mechanics of complete surrender first.
In historical and military terms, complete surrender, the Clausewitzian ideal of absolute victory, is almost always the result of a decisive, overwhelming maneuver capability.
Where one side completely and rapidly destroys the other's capacity and political will to resist.
Think of the rapid collapse of national defenses in the face of an overwhelming blitzkrieg.
Fast, violent, final.
Exactly.
But we just spent the last 40 minutes establishing that this specific conflict has likely lost that rapid maneuver capability. The front lines are freezing.
Exactly. And that makes complete surrender incredibly difficult, if not mathematically impossible, in the short to medium term.
Because they're just staring at each other from trenches.
When two modern, reasonably well-equipped forces dig into static, multi-layered defensive lines, the structural capacity for a sudden, total collapse is drastically minimized.
It ceases to be a test of tactical brilliance.
And becomes a grueling test of industrial capacity and demographic endurance.
A meat grinder.
To force a complete surrender in a positional war requires you to entirely exhaust the opponent's military-industrial complex.
Their manpower reserve.
Their civilian morale,
Which takes years.
as we've seen in historical parallels, like the staggering, horrific grind of the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s.
Or the trench warfare of World War I.
Exactly. That exhaustion rate can stretch on for years, costing millions of lives, without ever producing a single decisive knockout punch that forces total capitulation.
So if a knockout punch is structurally impossible given the tempo, the alternative presented by the text, a negotiated peace deal, isn't just a political preference.
No, not at
It
all.
might be a mathematical inevitability.
It speaks to the natural life cycle of stalemates.
Expand on that.
If the conflict is indeed slowing down, as evidenced by the lack of digital footage,
Right.
and settling into a long-term grind that spooks the long-term commodities markets.
Which we saw overnight.
That very strategic reality is what paves the way to the negotiating table.
Because everyone is just too tired and broke to keep fighting.
In almost all historical instances of prolonged, lower-intensity conflicts, there comes a point of mutual, agonizing exhaustion.
The state apparatus realizes that neither side can mass enough combat power to achieve a breakthrough without suffering unacceptable regime-threatening losses.
The economic costs reflected in those overnight spikes in oil and the massive drain on national treasuries become unsustainable.
So it's not about winning anymore, it's about not collapsing entirely.
It is an incredibly bitter reality, but the very factors that make complete surrender unlikely. The static, unmoving lines, the agonizingly slow pace, the massive resource drain
Are the exact same pressures that eventually, inevitably, compel both parties to seek a negotiated settlement.
A negotiated peace in this context isn't usually born out of sudden goodwill.
No, it's born out of the cold, hard calculus of mutual depletion. I want to throw this directly to you, the listener, right now, to weigh the evidence we've just pulled from this source.
That's a lot to process.
It is. You have the total sudden digital blackout on Twitter and viralvisible.com.
And the silence.
You have the tactical analysis suggesting a shift away from fast-paced maneuver warfare toward a grinding positional lower-intensity tempo.
The stalemate.
And you have the highly complex delayed reaction of the global commodities markets, which initially ignored the conflict before violently repricing the long-term risk of a multi-year war.
The realization.
Looking at those interconnected data points, which endgame scenario seems more structurally sound to you?
It's the big question.
Are the conditions we're seeing the recipe for a total, sweeping, complete surrender?
Or are these the classic, unmistakable warning signs of a conflict settling in for a long, painful stalemate?
A stalemate that can ultimately only be resolved through a negotiated peace deal.
The text puts the pieces on the board, but the final analysis requires connecting the physical realities of the battlefield to the macroeconomic realities of the globe.
That is the ultimate value of engaging deeply with a text like this.
Absolutely. True geopolitical awareness isn't about memorizing headlines or watching viral videos.
Anybody can do that.
It's about developing the analytical framework to spot the unseen patterns.
Seeing the matrix, so to speak.
Exactly. It's about realizing that a seemingly minor lack of information, a drop in OSINT uploads, and a seemingly disconnected economic anomaly, a delayed reaction in crude oil futures, are deeply intrinsically linked.
They are disparate symptoms of the exact same underlying shift in reality.
When you learn to read the negative space, to understand what the silence is hiding and why the markets are hesitating, you gain a vastly superior, almost architectural view of how global events actually unfold.
And that is exactly what we set out to do today.
I think we hit the mark.
I want to leave you with one final lingering thought to explore on your own.
Go for it.
We established that the digital front lines went totally dark right before institutional capital realized they were facing a prolonged grind, causing crude oil to spike overnight.
Right.
It makes you wonder. As warfare becomes increasingly static on the ground and as algorithms increasingly struggle to parse the silence, will the true decisive battles of these prolonged conflicts be fought not in the trenches, but in the psychological shadows of the global commodities markets, where what we can't see ultimately dictates the cost of survival for everyone?
That is a chilling thought.
It is. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.